today's class. Like I said last week, we started with what is cloud computing, where Jennifer took us on the journey, right, of what's the difference between the cloud computing in technology world and the, the raining cloud that we have right in the sky, right? And I believe every single one of us were able to understand what cloud computing is. She went a great depth of explaining the difference between cloud computing and the on-premises infrastructure counterpart. And she went further to talk about the cloud computing models, where we talk about infrastructure as a service, we talk about platform as a service, and we talk about software as a service, cloud computing model. Then she talk about CAPEX and OPEX, right, in terms of costing as it concerns cloud, right? And she also went further to break down the benefits of cloud computing services for us. Sorry, when I talk about model, I mean the setup type in terms of cloud only setup, hybrid setup, or private cloud setup, public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid cloud setup. Then she then also explained the different cloud services types. That's the IaaS, the PaaS, and the SaaS services options that we have. I think the only thing that was remaining in that particular slide was the responsibility. Because if I recall, somebody asked, I think there was a question that relates to how you manage services in the cloud. So I'm just going to, today's topic is, we are going to start with Azure Virtual Machine. That's administering virtual machines. We'll introduce us to virtual machine, and then we'll talk about how it is being administered in Azure, right? So just not to further delay, I will just move quickly, right? I just want to use this dashboard, right, to explain everything around, or maybe before I go, yes, this shared responsibility is part of this as well. So I'm going to talk about it in a little bit more detail later. So, but just to use this dashboard to kind of explain the concept of cloud virtual machine management in Azure for us, right? If you look at the slide, you will see a sketch of with the virtual machine sitting right in the middle. Right? It's sitting right in the middle, and it has tentacles, right? It has connection. This connection, they're not really connection per se, but they have to do with the properties or decisions or options that you have when it comes to creating virtual machines in Azure, right? One of the very first things that you need to understand is the naming convention or naming in when creating virtual machine. Just like you have a network, and every computer or every system on the network have their own unique name. The same thing applies when you go to Azure. Every computer must have its name as well. Now, let's say you have in your house, for instance, or even in your company, let's in your house or company, you have a group of people or a group of users that works in the same place or in the same building, right? And everybody have their own computer, and then you have to be able to share resources. So there are two ways by which computers can be managed, or they can share resources or talk to each other on the network. One way is to use the work group approach, where every system is standing on as an island. Every system is standing on their own. But something can bring them together, which is the way you network the systems to be able to talk to one another. If your computers are connecting to the same wireless, there is there's every possibility that they are going to be able to share resources with each other. Now, let's assume you have two computers on the network, computer PC1, right? You have PC1 and then you have PC2, okay? PC1 and PC2 need to be able to talk to each other. Now, let's even assume you have PC1 or two computers are bearing exactly the same name. While you are trying to share resource, even the computer you are trying to share resource from might be thinking you are trying to share with itself, because there are two computers that bear exactly the same name on the network. And though IP address can differentiate them, but if you remember to say what is the IP, or you're just trying to use the computer name, so there will be confusion. So the same way in Azure, when you are creating a virtual machine, every virtual machine must have a unique name. A unique name, not only virtual machine, every resource author that you must create must have a unique name on Azure, right? So that's the first thing you need to pay attention to. The second thing you have to pay attention to is the image, right? Okay, before I come to the image, let me talk about the storage. Now, the storage is also very important in the sense that if you look at your phone, you must have heard something like your phone memory, like internal memory or SD card, right? At some point, you might buy SD card and insert into your phone memory, or you purchase a headphone that have SD card slots. You need to purchase SD card. That's a storage. And what you use the storage for is to store data on whatever device you have put that particular storage, right? The same thing applies to a computer. When you want to buy a computer, let's say you want to buy a Dell or HP laptop, it must come with the storage. If you do not have storage on it, there is no way you can install the operating system in the first place, talk less of sharing or storing or saving contents on that particular storage. So likewise, in Azure, when you're creating a virtual machine, you also have to make the decision on the storage and type of storage that you want to use, okay? There are different types of storage that you can use with your virtual machines when it comes to Azure services. Then another thing is now what is called the image. The image have to do with the operating system. Imagine if you purchase a phone or you buy a phone and you took the phone home and you power it on, you're expecting to see an interface where you can touch, where you can see the applications on the screen and start touching and opening the application and using them. But you power on the phone and everything is just black. Yet the phone manufacturer or vendor you bought it from said, nothing's wrong with the phone, it's fine. So if there is no image on the phone, though there are different types of images, there is the one that allow you to see everything as it is on the device. And there is the one that you cannot see. In order for you to work on such device, you have to use, you have to be running command or running script, right? So, but you need to know that it is very important that you make a choice of the image, and the image we are talking about here has to do with the operating system. Most of us have our own personal computers at home, and even from your phone, some of us will buy phone that is running Android. That Android is the operating system on it. Some people buy an iPhone. iPhone is running Apple, is running iOS. That is also the operating system on that phone. You can purchase an HP laptop, and the HP laptop is running a Windows 10 or Windows 11, for instance. That is your operating system. So the same thing applies when you go to Azure and you want to create a virtual machine. You need to decide which operating system you want to use. Now, the operating system you are using in this case now, it is dependent on the application that you are going to be running on that computer. So you have different type of operating system. You have Windows, you have Ubuntu, you have Red Hat, you have SUSE. Those are type of Linux, right, OS that you have in Azure. Then one other thing that you need to consider is now you have, sorry, before we talk about access, we talk about cost. While you are creating your virtual machine, one critical information or important decision is, oh, what is the device, what is the server going to be used for? What is the resource? How heavy is the resource or application that is going to be running on this server? That will determine, do you need more processor or do you need less processor and more memory? Do you need storage? Now, when it comes to storage, there are different type of, you need storage, but there are different type of storage. You have the standard HDD storage, and you have the new storage, which is the solid state storage, that's SSD. SSD storage are more faster than the HDD storage. And also in Azure, there are two types of SSD storage. There is the standard SSD storage, and there is the premium SSD storage. So you need to decide depending on how fast you want the server to be. Each of these resources is having an effect on your overall cost of the server, of the particular machine that you are setting up, right? The higher the resources that you select, the more you have to pay for that resource. Now, after you make this decision and you set up your operating system, the next thing that you also have to select is what we call availability option. And you have zones, you have availability set, and you have scale set. Right? Each of these is contributing, is a factor that you have to choose. When it comes to zone, you need to know what are the availability options do you want to. Do you want a situation, is it a kind of service that if it goes down, your user can wait? Or is it a service that it cannot go down at all, right? And then when we talk of VM scale set, it has to do with, oh, how slow or how fast, or how many servers will be running the same services at a time. Yes, we will talk more about that. Then one other thing you also have to consider, right, is the access method. Depending on the operating system that you use, that will determine the access method that you are going to be using to access the virtual machine that you have set up in Azure, right? You have, if it is Windows, you have two options. You have the RDP using the standard remote desktop protocol applications that come with Windows. Or you can use the VASTIN option. This one allows you to be able to use HTML5, right? HTML version 5 to access your virtual machine within your browser without using the desktop app on your desktop, on your computer. Then if it is a Linux machine, you have to be able to do what we call secure cell access to the machine. So you'll be using SSH in that case. Finally, on this slide is what we call responsibility. For this responsibility, I'm going to be going to probably the next slide, right? There's a slide that talk about responsibility. Let me quickly go there. I'll come back in a bit. Okay. Yes, so here is the shared responsibility when it comes to Azure. Every service provider have their part to play when it comes to the services that they are providing for you. While you, as a user or the customer, also have a part to play. Now, remember last week when Jennifer was talking about the on-premise, how they were able to go to Otigba, or she and her boss were able to go to Otigba to go and couple a computer, set it up, install the application, connect it to the network, give access, and the rest. If you notice everything that happened there, the two of them were responsible for maintaining, setting up, managing, operating, and everything they have to do with the on-prem. They have the full responsibility of that infrastructure. Now, when it comes to cloud, they said the responsibility is shared, right? It is called shared responsibility model. the responsibility is shared. And this is obvious from this slide here. You have 3 services that we have on this slide, majorly in the cloud. You have the SaaS, you have the PaaS, you have the IaaS. And you will see close to the on-premises infrastructure, the IaaS have the highest responsibility that have to do with you, the customer. From this legend, the light blue represents responsibility from Microsoft. Dark blue represents responsibility from you. And where we have light blue and dark blue, it is a shared responsibility. So from here, if you notice the IaaS have to do with setting up virtual machine, configuring your storage, and then database and the rest. You are responsible for creating the VM. You are responsible for patching the operating system on that virtual machine. You are responsible for installing your application and managing it and patching your application. You are responsible for the security aspect of that particular application that is running on that virtual machine. You are responsible for it when it comes to the IaaS. If you look from below, the physical host, physical network, and the physical data center building is the responsibility of the service provider, because you don't have to concern yourself about where it is hosted, but you just want to spin up an operating system, whether it's 2012, 2016, 2019, or 2022 is what you want to run, or even Windows 10, right? You have, that is, depending on what you are doing, the responsibility for you start from the operating system. You are responsible to patch it, network configuration, application installation and management, and identity as identity, then protecting the data that you have created or generated over time on that particular virtual machine. It is your responsibility. Then moving away from IaaS to PaaS, you will see that as you move up to the SaaS level, your own responsibility is reducing in terms of what you have control over and what the service provider have control over, right? So here in the past, you have less responsibility, but there are still things that you have to take charge of. When it comes to operating system, this particular service is being used by developers most of the time. All they want is just to have a platform where they can create their code or write their code using whatever language, whatever framework they want to use, and whatever plugin they want to use, they can use it without having the headache of, oh, I need to patch the operating system. So Microsoft, in this case, will be responsible for patching the operating system and maintaining the operating system for the developers. But they are now coming from the network. They need to also, they have responsibility when it comes to network, how they control the access to the particular application that they have created and deployed for their users, right? They have to implement control. They have to configure their application. Microsoft have a part here, and you as a user or customer also have a part to play, in the sense that you are the one writing your application, but they are hosting it for you. And you are, you know, all the things, all the components that have to come together to make your application work. That is your core, not Microsoft core. Then as you move up to right from account and identity management of the application, that is, who can access the application, when can they access the application, what can they do within the application. Yes, those are your responsibility. Can mobile devices connect to this application? It's your responsibility. And when you see it across all 4, you have, you are in charge of those. And finally, I'm move to the SaaS aspect of it. In the SaaS, you have, just be sure that so everyone can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so from the SaaS aspect of it, you notice the responsibility of the operating of the service provider is more pronounced there. They manage the physical data center, the networking of the physical computers or hosts that they have. They talk of routers, physical routers, switches, firewall, physical, apart from building the rack that the servers are mounted on. They talk of power, talk of cooling, talk of security. In terms of physical security, now they have to implement access control on every doors. They have to implement camera for visibility and of who entered there and the rest. So even to the operating system, they manage it. Network control here, you don't have control over how the network are connected. They are just providing you a service and you come in, use the service, and after using the service, or as long as you're using the service, you are paying for it. Recall that it is a consumption-based billing model. That's what the cloud adopts, right? Then, so that's it. Share responsibility. I just say, let me quickly explain it to us so that we have a full understanding of it. Okay, so I'm going to be going a little bit backward. Now, when you are creating your virtual machine, one of the things you have to take into account is what we call region. And what are regions? Regions are actually representing data center, right? They are representing the physical location of your data center, where that service you are using, where it is hosted, right? Regions are made up of one or more data centers. Now, there can be multiple data centers in the same region. So when we talk of region now, we can talk about maybe Europe region, the West Europe region, the East Europe region, the Central US region, and in Africa, you have South Africa region. You just have those regions, like I said, they have to do with physical location of the data center. And Microsoft have their data center in over 140 countries and is still growing, right? You are aware that South Africa was just added recently. That data, the data center number is still growing because more people, more users are coming more and more into the cloud, or they are adopting the cloud services. So the number of data centers, physical data centers, keep increasing across different regions. In Africa before now, we do not have, but until South Africa came up, okay? Now, they provide what we call flexibility and scale to reduce latency when it comes to access to the services or resources that you are hosting on those cloud platforms, right? Let's say it's a virtual machine or even app services that you are setting up. Yeah, you want to create an e-commerce website. You will look at where you have more customers, right? If you have more customers in the US location or in the US, in the geography, US, you have more customers in the US. Then when you are setting up your server, you need to pick a region that is closest to your users so that the latency or delay they experience from their computer or their network to your server is reduced, right? That's one of the benefits of region. Another benefit of region is when it comes to compliance requirements. So for financial organizations, for instance, there is a requirement that says certain type of data cannot be hosted in the cloud, or if it must be hosted in the cloud, those data must be hosted in a particular region, maybe in Africa region. It cannot be hosted in the US, for instance, or it cannot be hosted in China, things like that. So this where region is also very, very important for you to make that decision when you are creating your resources in Azure. Then we move very quickly to availability zone. Availability zones now have to do with the physical separate, it has to do with physically separating the data center, the locations within a region, within an Azure region. So what it does is, let's say in the West Europe region, for instance, you have 10 data centers. Each of those data centers have to be paired in such a way that, for instance, from this diagram that you will see a single Azure region, and you will see 3 zones. Let's say this is West Europe, that's this W, West Europe, and you have this is South, for instance, and you have this is North. Okay, so you configure the data centers or resources are configured in such a way that one zone is backing up another zone. Now, there is no possibility that all zones in a particular data center, I mean, a particular region will go down at the same time. And there is also there's also a possibility, or the possibility is not so significant, to say all data centers in a particular zone go down at the same time. But yes, that can happen. In the case of natural disaster, if the data centers in a zone, maybe zone 1, for instance, they are close to each other, yes, there's a proximity calculation that has to be. And the entirety of that region is consumed by flood, for instance, it means all the data centers will be affected. But in this case, there's another data center. Yes.
So Sintoye is in.
Sorry?
So Sintoye, she's in already.
Oh, Tosintoye is in already. Okay. Tosin, you're welcome. So are you ready for us?
You may have to enable her mic.
Okay, I have. Yes, Tosin, I've enabled your mic.
No, don't worry, you can continue this part and finish so that.
Okay, all right.
So
I will just round up. Once I round up this part, I will give you the mic. Yes, thank you very much. So now, the zone, the regions have, that's the zone now. Zone 2 is backing up zone 1. And zone 3 is backing up zone 2. That way they have what they call a mesh kind of connectivity to one another. So that means when you are sorting up your virtual machine, you need to be deliberate to say you want the zone, the virtual machine or resource that you are setting up, you want it to be in an availability zone. And when you are doing that, you have to now select the zones that will back up each other, or the second zone you want your second virtual machine or a copy or a backup of your resource to be. So if one data center in a zone go down, for instance, and the entire region is still up, right? You will have another data center in that same zone that will take over that will take over from the data center that went down. But if a whole zone go down, you have another zone that will bring up your resources for you to continue to use. So that's the way availability zone and region work in Azure. It also helps to prevent data center failure, right? It has the way the networking are configured. They are configured in such a way that their power, they have independent power, independent cooling, and independent networking. So it's not a situation where the network in a particular data center or region goes down or zone go down and it affects the other zone. No, they are all configured to stand alone on their own. Like it look like a modular kind of setup, right? Where when one module collapse, the other services are still running, or user have another way. And the zones are configured in such a way that they uses fiber backbone for its backbone connection. So you have dark fibers everywhere, or anything that is higher than dark fibers. Those are the fiber type that can transmit the highest type of size of bandwidth, right, across different data centers. So that's the way it's actually configured for the data center availability zone, and for your resources to be available and reachable at all times. And the reason for this is Microsoft has promised you, for instance, they promised um, maybe 99.59 uptime, but your resource that you set up, depending on the scaling set, the availability set that you pick, we also determine the availability time that, or the SLA, your SLA with Microsoft. So that's important to keep in mind. I'll just quickly finish now. Regions, yes, just like you have availability zone, you also have region pair. And region pairing, what is doing majorly, that's pairing one region with another. If this region goes down, which regions will back it up, right? Here you can see you have North Central US backing up South Central US, right? These are all to ensure and prevent, to ensure there is no general failure that will also affect your own services. That's majorly why you have multiple regions and regions backing up regions, multiple zones, zones backing up zones, and multiple data centers where they are backing up each other, right? So you have region pairing when it comes to Azure. And then now there are what we call sovereignty when it comes to Azure services as well. When in the US, the government particularly, they don't use the general Azure resources that every other person in the world uses. They have their own dedicated region that they can set up their services, right? That's because of their own policy that they have. Likewise, we have China. If you recall, if you know, China does not kind of they don't agree to share data with just anybody around the world. They limit what their users, the kind of application, the social media, and things that users can do on the internet. It's a very censored, right, region or country. So as a result, they also have their own dedicated Azure region that they host their services on. They don't use the other services that the regions that every other person, every other companies use within Azure. So I just say, let me quickly explain some of those things to us before we now move proper into the virtual machine aspect of that's managing the virtual machine in Azure.
I came in while you were talking about the Android system and the operating system, and what it's just as how we know the Android and how it works is how virtual machines. So I'll continue. I just want to take you back a bit. I would just highlight this, one of the four areas that is key when you talk about Azure. Is one of them is computing, which she has highlighted. And when we talk about the computing aspect is where we have the four. I have a presentation on that. Let me just go ahead. Okay. So when we talk about the computing parts, just know that the core services of Azure, when we talk about the computing part, we have the compute, we have the storage, we have the networking, and we have databases. 4 parts, 4 services of the Azure. We have the computing, we have the storage, we have the networking, we have the databases. And on the core services of Azure, we've talked about, we've started with the compute, which is virtual machines. You have under the computing, you have virtual machines, you have Azure Kubernetes service, you have Azure functions, you have web apps. All these tie to the computing part of the core services of Azure. Then we have under storage, have the storage, blob storage, we have the Azure files, you have the Azure disk storage, you have Azure queue storage. All these tie under storage. Then when we talk about the networking, we have the VNet, we have the load balancer, we have the Azure firewall, we have the content delivery network, we have the DNS. And in this, we'll go on to the databases. When we talk about Azure databases, we talk about the Azure. Okay, let me. Okay, someone says I'm not sharing the right screen. Yes, so this is not in the slide that you're looking at right now. This is just a recap. But we'll move on. So I'm explaining to you why, so we're talking about the core services of Azure, which is computing. Under computing, we have virtual machines. So this is where we are now. Planning virtual machine starts with the network. Name the virtual machine, choose a location, consider pricing. This is where we are now. So core services of Azure. When we talk about the core services of Azure, it can be broken into 4 places, which I mentioned earlier: the computing, the storage, the networking, the databases. And the reason I'm highlighting this part is so that when we start to talk about, because right now she has started talking about the virtual machines, which is under computing of the core services of Azure. And we have under computing, we have virtual machines, we have Azure Kubernetes service, we have the Azure functions, we have the web apps. Thank you. Thank you for, okay, thank you. Yeah, so so this is what I'm referring to here under Azure Compute Services. It's an on-demand service that provides computing resources such as disks, processors, memory, networking, and operating systems. So when we're talking about Azure, we know that Azure can provide you 4 of these services. It's important to know this service because when you talk to your customers, you need them to know what capabilities they can have, what functionalities, what things they can use. Because sometimes when you don't know the use of something, you don't know how to use it best. You don't know how to use it best when you are not. Am I clearer? Okay. Can you hear me better? So we talk about virtual machines.
Can hear
We
you.
have. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Virtual machines, app services, containers, instances, Azure Kubernetes services. We have the Azure Virtual Desktop. But right now, we're going to be focusing on the virtual machines because this one enables you to create and manage clouds with different OS and applications. And when we talk about these other parts of Azure, the networking aspect, we refer to all the VNets, We have VNets, load balancers, Azure firewall, DNS. Then when we talk about the database, that's where you talk about SQL database, talk about Cosmos database, we talk about the posts, GRE data, SQL database, and all the likes. Then when we talk about storage, that's when we talk about blob storage, talk about Azure files, we talk about the Azure disk storage services. Exactly. So this the reason I'm explaining this is so that we know how to break it down, because sometimes, especially when you're taking the exam, you need to understand how all these tie into one. You need to understand how they relate into the main thing. So this Azure blob is used for storing amounts of unstructured data such as text or binary. Then we have the Azure disk. It provides the virtual machines with space. That's where your services, access to services, that's where you can actually store things. That's where it stores a lot of applications that you create. So when you create applications on Azure, it stores them here. You have the queue. This one is a message storing service. It is used for large amounts of messages for example, people use it most times to set up the email system, to set up some using Outlook, and they connect it as a form of connection to storage, as a form of message service. Then we talk about the Azure files. It's used to store what they call the server message block protocol. It's SMBP. This is the protocol that enables you to store files. You know, if we talk about networking, you know that, I don't know how many networking people are here, but naturally, you know that in networking, you always have what they call routing protocols, right? So, the protocol that enables you to have access to your routing table and check. So in Azure, we have the Azure tables. We have the Azure tables, which acts like what your routing table does in networking. It provides a key option for data storage. So where you store, when you have data that is being stored in this place here in your Azure table, it goes to pick it up and relates it to the data which you are talking about. Then we have the networking. That's where we have talk about load balancer. That's where under load balancer, it's important because that one helps you to distribute your traffic. But let me go back. Sorry, can I go back to your other slides on the VM? So we'll go back to setting up VM, the virtual machines. So okay, so we will start here with the network. This is how we set up a virtual machine. I will try to do a bit of practical. Using this account. I don't know which account. I'm coming, please.
You say?
Okay. So I was saying that we start with the network, how to plan a virtual machine. It's important that we understand. We start with the network. What network are we connecting to? Who are our users? Who is our target audience? So who are the target audience that we are talking about. Then we name the virtual machine. And in naming your virtual machine, it's important that you give it a name. You could give it any name, or a name that ties to the project you're working for. Say you're working for Unilever Nigeria, and you are trying to join to another zone. Like Titi had talked about the zones. Unilever Nigeria, you're trying to join to Unilever London, and you want to connect the two zones with a virtual machine. You name the virtual machine maybe Lagos 1 to London, or you say LGLLL1 London Lagos 1. Then you choose, each region has a different hardware and service capabilities. So when you choose these things, based on these hardware and service capabilities, your resource, the money you spend, increases. As she mentioned earlier, each region has a hardware and service capability. This is something very critical to notice, because sometimes even in the exams, you need to note that each region's hardware and the service capabilities can either make you spend more money or either make you spend less money. Sometimes when you use Asian countries or Asian hardwares and service capabilities, you tend to spend less than when you use America or Canada for the regions when you're choosing a location. This just by experience or by practicals, you notice the difference in the costs. We were talking about locating virtual machines. So this is what I'm referring to. Now you go to annotate here. I'm talking about choosing a location here. Locating virtual machines as close as possible to your users and ensuring compliance and legal obligations. So as much as possible, it's important that your virtual machine is located close to your user. For example, when I'm choosing a location, I choose Africa, somewhere. So when you're creating a virtual machine and you're trying to choose a location, ensure that you tie it to the location that is closer to where you are at, or where the users of that virtual machine are going to be located. So for example, I'm in Nigeria. I would like to choose a virtual machine location that is tied to Africa. Although sometimes, like she mentioned, we noticed that when you choose like a South Africa and other regions that are available closer to Africa, closer to West Africa, you notice sometimes that the cost might even is lower than the cost you pay for connecting with an Asian location to create a virtual machine, when you're creating a virtual machine. So that's why it's key to understand that, because even pricing, when we talk about pricing, it's also important, because the server you use also determines the pricing you get, the money you spend. So for Azure, for the virtual machines, most times you need to be certain that it's always advisable to use what's closest to you and what is more acceptable, what is more reachable, because the reason is the closer your region or your location is, the easier it is for even load balancing. When we talk about load balancing is like where you share traffic across multiple virtual machines, and you're able to have a balance in a way that, so what it is like you have you have a structure like this. Sorry, I wanted to annotate this part. I don't have that annotated. Okay, so let me just leave that. I wanted to try and
Are you sure you
annotate.
don't want to share?
Okay, let me share. The capability is not image sharing. Oh, I can't share. I can't still share. Okay, no problem. Let me go on with this. So what I mean is, so what I want to just explain is the important is understanding how this works from determining a virtual machine, considering price. She has also highlighted before about the need to determine your size. The normal this thing is balance CPU to memory ratio, understanding determining. So how do you determine, let me just go to this one. How do you determine your virtual machine size? How do you determine your virtual machine size? So usually we have a standard, which is here, which she has highlighted here, which is highlighted here in the slide. Here, general purpose, we have compute optimized, we have the storage optimized, we have this GPU, high performance compute. And one thing about this is that when you are doing this sizing, it's important to know which kind of users you are dealing with, which kind of application you're going to be running on the virtual machine. Because there are some applications that your size, if the size is very, if the size of what you are running, the virtual machine, is too, doesn't have enough memory space, you find out that when it's time to provide when it's time to provide when it's time to provide sorry, I saw a message. Okay. Should I take questions while, okay, when it's time to provide when you're dealing with clients in UK and Canada, for example, and somebody is asking, would it be necessary to provision separate virtual machines in each region to optimize performance and compliance? Or is there an efficient way to manage latency and data residency requirements using a single deployment? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. However, I would not advise you use one single deployment. I would advise you use two different, so that when one goes down, one can work. So when one virtual machine is down, the other one can be as, that's why the zoning, as she explained earlier, is important, so that when one is down, another can continue working. So what happens is, that's where the load balancing comes into play. So load balancing, right, is, it enables you, when we talk about this, we'll get to that. But here we're talking about the sizing, because when we talk about this general purpose, balance CPU to memory ratio. So you have to think about what the CPU and the memory ratio would be, how much information will be stored on the database. It's also important that you understand that what what are you going to be, what is going to be stored at the end. So for example, you are creating an application, a virtual machine. Let me try to relate this with something to do with customer care. And maybe you are like you're like an MTN, and you you want to create a virtual machine for your users in Nigeria, to the ones in America, or you want to create, let me bring it down to Nigeria, because okay, I think most of us here are Nigerians. So you want to create from a location, say Lagos to London, and you are trying to understand, you're trying to use your virtual machine sizing. We're talking about virtual machine sizing. And so you need to understand that the sizing is important because there's what's called skill sets. And so sometimes when we have skill sets, virtual machine skill sets provides a load balanced opportunity to automatically scale resources. This is reason why it's important, because so the reason why this is important is because here we're talking about sizing, virtual machine sizing. So usually we talk about this skill sets, and when we talk about skill sets, we're actually talking about the kind of size you use for your virtual machine, on your virtual machine, your availability set. So sometimes there can be failure on your physical servers. Did you have is what helps you to, in cases of failure. So for example, sometimes when like, okay, let me give it an experience that has happened. I know I can relate to them. So there was a time, one of our locations in Lagos and here you Akwa Ibom, so we had and then London, so we had three different virtual machines. And what it is that when we talk about these, so we noticed that the one in Uyo was having, it needed an increment in the sense that it became very slow. The virtual machine became very slow. Users could not access company data easily. So we noticed that the server that was hosted on this particular virtual machine, say Uyo, for example, became very slow. And so we needed to increase the capacity. So that capacity increase is where, when we talk about the virtual machine skill sets, which means that we needed to increase. So when we talk about the increase we needed to do, we have to make the increase from the skill sets. And what this skill set does is that, so when you, it's always important that you deploy instances of the virtual machine. What do I mean by instances of the virtual machine? Is you deploy examples, like when you say copycats, duplicates of a single virtual machine in other locations, so that when one is down, the other can work. What the skill set does, and availability set, it enables you to add extra in case of where your size has been depleted or the size is not enough. So you are able to scale up, like the word says, you are able to scale up, you are able to add more resources, you are able to add more so that you gain more availability. So this enables you to, for example, you started a business that you didn't expect, that maybe you started an application business that has to do with creating, hosting music or entertainment, and suddenly you discovered one night that users, the number of people that came on the virtual machine through the virtual machine, the number of people that started using your application multiplied in a space of 2 hours, or maybe in a space of 15 hours. So what do? The first thing you do is to check your machine skill set and your availability set. This enables you to make sure that, like it says here, it sets another tool to help you build a more resilient, highly available environment. Note that word, highly available environment, because you don't want to build a virtual machine that is not available. It's sometimes these are the reasons why people build virtual machines and suddenly it just packs up or it crashes, because they did not set something that is scalable. And when we talk about something that's scalable, we're talking about something that can be easily expanded at any time. So something that you can expand, that you don't need to do so much, but yet you can just change. You don't need to change the entire structure to expand. You just need to change the number of virtual instances. So like it says here, the number of virtual machine instances can automatically increase due or decrease due to demand. So you can set it to a scale based on a defined schedule. So for example, you say, okay, if it increases by this number, put this skill set. If it reduces by this number, put it by this. And the good thing about this is that it can work with your load balancer to make sure that resources are efficiently distributed. Because what the load balancer does is that it enables your resources to be shared efficiently, so that it's not as if, because you have something as your backup. So I can create like 2 different virtual machines for one location, and I create one as the main virtual machine, and I create a second virtual machine as the second backup. What I can do is that the load balancer will now enable that when traffic is coming from the user, it goes to share, it shares the data into 2 different places, right? It shares the data into 2 different places. But what load balancer does is that it enables one to work, while the second one becomes like the secondary, but it's not active. It's active, but it's like it's not functionally active. So the load balancer distributes traffic in a way that the traffic is not a hindrance, because you need your virtual machine to work in the most available way that it can. You need it to be very much available, that people can access it. It is easily reachable. The servers that work on the virtual machines are easily reachable. Applications are easily reachable. So you do not want a virtual machine that is not reachable or available. And sometimes in setting up these things, you need to consider these options, that what if I need to scale up? The good thing about virtual machines is that you can scale up in just few hours. You don't need to go and start bringing down this, like she talked about, the SaaS, the PaaS, platform as a service, service, and all that. SaaS and PaaS, you don't need to go through the level of control you have as the administrator is really, really high in this case here. Really, really high in this case here. Please move down. Okay. So
Is this okay?
yes. Scroll down
Down
more.
to
Yeah.
okay.
So I'll just explain examples of why we use virtual machines. I think you had already talked about that, but I'll just to highlight a bit of it. We use it during testing and development. We use it to run applications in the cloud. We use it to extend your data center to the cloud. We use it during disaster recovery. So, and like I mentioned earlier, sometimes you can have a virtual machine. For example, somebody asked a question about having disaster, having a backup in UK, having a virtual machine in UK and Canada, and using one single deployment. Yes, you can use one single virtual machine. However, it's advisable to have a second one. What are you hiding it for? There's nothing, because I mean, having multiple virtual machines, all you just need to do is just like, because virtual machines run on the cloud, so it's just like creating different how's it called, different virtual machines on, you can create different virtual machines on on one um one desktop, or on one account. Yes, on one Azure account you can create several virtual machines on one Azure account. So, and what you can do is that you can now segment those virtual machines to work as a form of disaster recovery, so that when anything happens to one, the other parts, like she talked about the zones, and the other parts in the other zones can take over. And when we talk about extending your data center to the cloud, one of the good things about virtual machines is that because you are using it already on the cloud, an organization that maybe has an on-premises data center. So for example, like my office, we have an on-premise data center in our Akwa Ibom office, but we don't have a data center, a fully fledged data center in Lagos. So we use a transfer. So we use a virtual machine in two different locations, so that whatever happens in Uyo, and if there's a breakdown, Lagos can take over, and Lagos can help to continue running our virtual machine and other services that run on the virtual machines. So for example, applications like SharePoint, they can run on your Azure virtual machine. SharePoint, they can run on your Azure virtual machine. So for example, if SharePoint goes down here, because the way my own office is down here, we still have access to SharePoint. Not because here the data center that is located here is working. It's because there has been set up a backup, which is in Lagos, that has extended, which is a data center in the cloud. So it enables us to work in a very efficient way without troubling ourselves. You see what is written here. The arrangement makes it easier and less expensive to deploy on-premises environments. So it is very important. This is like one of the key uses of the virtual machines, because it enables you to deploy without spending too much cost on on-premises data center. I'll say it again, it enables you make deployments, it enables you run applications without necessarily spending too much on on-premises environment, because the cost of a data center, number one, note that data centers, you have to keep the temperature of that environment to a certain degree. I know how many times we have had alerts on my data center that, oh, this device is running at a temperature that is above what the data center requires, because we have a sensor phone that is installed that tells us certain, gives us reports about the temperature. So to run an on-premises data center is is highly cost, it's highly cost, it's highly expensive. And so to run it many times in different regions, imagine if Facebook had to run data centers in many parts of the world, in every single place that they are located. It would be a lot for them cost-wise. So running virtual machine is a way of simplifying and making things easier for yourself. Well, you said, is it the same as a server room? No, it is not, because it has some similarities. Yes, it does. It has some similarities. However, for me, I would say it's like an advanced, because you have your servers arranged in another side. You have your firewalls. You have um you have your, well, some people will say, I don't describe it as a server room. It's a data center. Should I say server room could just be your local connections based on what you are supporting. But from what I know, server rooms are usually smaller, but the on-premise data center is larger. It has to do with it's a whole lot, because you're not just dealing with usually you have several regions. You are dealing with countries. You are dealing with locations in many cases when you talk about the data center, and you're dealing with several locations. You're dealing with something very complex. That's what it is in most cases. So I would thank you for that question. Okay. Yeah, they're not when you, yes, exactly, they're not. When we talk about the scope and the size of the server room versus a an on-premise data center, they're not. So, and when you even talk about the management and maintenance, it's not, because the cost of maintaining that, like I mentioned, I gave you an example of temperature. You need to keep your data center at a certain temperature. If not, you start having, you lose a lot of money. I know the number of devices we have, firewalls, we have the servers, we have backup servers, we have virtual machines. We have more than about 20 virtual machines I know that run. On one of our servers alone, we have about 3, 4 virtual machines running on it. And each of these virtual machine own has their own service. That means that has their own application they are running, because we have several applications. So some of our virtual machines run with SharePoint, some run with other applications we have, like we have FortiGate and some other applications that we run. So these are, that's just a summary, or rather an example. So we'll move on to the next, please. Can you move on down to the next so that we can do some practical okay, it's already 11:30. Okay, so the next, please. Okay, so we've talked
So
about
which one on this same page?
okay, no problem. And let me just highlight this. Yeah. So we're creating a virtual machine. Um, creating a virtual machine. So this is what the Linux. Okay, we'll skip the Linux one.
What do you want me to do next now?
Okay. Skip this. Okay, let me go to the.
You want me to share the Azure environment?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. I'm going to share my own screen, but it's not, I still don't have the share option.
Coming to subscription. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, thank you. So okay, yeah. So this is okay. So this is here. There's already an existing this thing. I think this is the one I created on this account yesterday.
Hmm?
Did I delete? I deleted it. Okay, I deleted it. No, you know, you gave me access.
Yeah.
The one I created and I deleted. Okay, let me just use. So would when we talk about this subscription, this is where your money goes. The resources that you select, the resources you add on your virtual machine. So your subscription, you know, it's not cheap, it's not free. Microsoft doesn't give you this. It's not cheap usually, and so that's why it's important that you understand the kinds of servers you're going to use, the kind of resources. So when we talk about the resources, we're referring to the server types, the file type, the kind of things you are going to be using, the applications you're running on the virtual machine. So please
Let's
back
put
to
volume.
virtual machine.
Add volume, please.
Okay.
Add volume.
Okay.
Yes, your voice is going low again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a bit better.
Okay. So what I mean is so we'll start with creating a virtual machine. So we'll click on this button here. Create.
Right?
Create new.
Okay.
You can see RG1, or let's use the normal RG1. Okay. Region 1 or resource 1. Region 1, for example, that's the virtual machine name I want to create. Then can decide that the name will be the virtual machine name. You can use, okay, this is cohort 6, right? Cohort 6.
Yes, cohort 6. Right. Okay. Cohort 6. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Then the region. This is also key because it's always advisable if you're in Africa, use a region in Africa. But however, sometimes from experience, sometimes I notice that some regions, even in Africa, are more expensive than sometimes. So most times we use um, South Africa, North South Africa. Although I also notice that sometimes Asian regions are cheap, but it's best to use the one that's closer to you. So let's use which of them now? West Europe, right? That would be London, Scotland, and all those areas. Okay, let's use West Europe. It's closer to us since Africa. So availability zone. So it's, you see, notice this part here where you have availability zone, distribute virtual machine skill sets, availability sets, then availability set automatically. So notice that one enables you to distribute your VMs across zones and faults domains at scale. The other one, I will automatically distribute your VMs across multiple fault domains. Okay, yeah, I just remembered I skipped that part in the training. There was a part we should have. So the part of the fault domains under load balancing. Let me
Okay.
okay, under load balancing. Let me okay, you can go on. Let's just I'll come back to that. Just someone remind me. So choose yes. Selected zone, availability zone. Yes, so we go on to zone 1. There are some things you don't touch because we're just using the free trial 1 version right now. So you don't want to start spending too much money. So this image here, as she had explained earlier about the type of server that would run on your virtual machine. Here we chose Windows Server 2019 Data Center 64-bit because this is usually cheaper than most of the data center, most of the server 2019 data center. There are other options of Ubuntu, Linux, Oracle servers, Red Hat Enterprise servers. However, also note that these options that we're getting here is also limited because of the subscription that's put on this particular account for Azure. Data Center 2022, it will be high, it will be expensive. But okay, yeah, server, yeah, data center. Okay, so we use Windows Server 2022 Data Center Azure Edition. So this is, you can see this is the image. So remember, she gave an example of when you run Android on your operating system that's running on your phone. So that's what we have selected now. In this case, the image. Then run down to the size. So we have standard size, which is 1 gig with 1 vCPU with 1 gig memory. And this price goes at 11.868 per month for this capacity, for this virtual machine size. Know that this is also where your money goes. So sometimes when you pay for subscription with Azure, you need to understand that your virtual machine size can also be the reason why so you need to be conscious of size. So you don't want something that's too big and what you are running on it is not too much. And you also need to consider size because you can go and install something that's too large and your size cannot handle it. And the virtual machine will be running at it will hardly be available. So when we talk of size, there's the DC series, D series, V6, 6th generation, D series, V5, and all this work. I always like to use the DC series, the first one. Yeah. Okay, you can use this. This is cheaper.
This one.
DC.
D6 or D5?
Yes, this is a 5, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see what it is? Can you see the functions here? Note these functions here. It says D family size is recommended for general purpose needs. What are those general purpose needs? For example, maybe SharePoint, or you just want to post an email server, or maybe even a website. So you can recommend for general purpose needs. So this is one virtual machine size that is recommended for things that are general, it doesn't require too much confidentiality. Note the other one above, the DC series, designed to protect confidentiality and integrity of code. For people that are into development of complex codes, I would advise you use the other one. But for people that just use it for general purposes, you can use these options, this C series. Okay, you can choose. Select.
This guy is $100.
This one's expensive. Oh.
Let's just pick this one. So depending on what you want to do, like I said, you have to select.
Okay.
But it's a lab environment, so I use something small. Right? Oh, yeah.
So in this
And
case,
continue,
we
please.
okay. Okay. So in this case, we can give it a name, anybody's name. Let's say, okay, cohort 6. And we create a password with cohort 6. Password, you can use cohort 6, 1, 2, 3, or hash. Note that the characters must be 12 characters long, the minimum. Yes, you can get a chance to practice, because right now, do you have, for some of you in this class, you can simply go to portal.azure, to the Azure portal. If you have an Outlook account, you register yourself on the Azure portal. Once you're able to log in, free account, use the free account. It will verify your phone number. And if you're a first-time user, you'll be able to log in. Or if you're not a first-time user with that email account, you may not, that's the first-time user into the Azure, you may not be able to log in. You will need to pay. That's what Microsoft has. So you need to pay, and you need to buy subscription. So this is whenever this account has been paid with subscription. We've added subscription on it. So here, so now this is where you say select inbound ports. So it's important to note this, because this will allow all IP addresses to access your virtual machine. You know, like we said, this is only for testing, because in advanced networking, this thing, you have to limit traffic to your virtual machine. You need to limit the kinds of people, especially for hackers, or you limit setting, maybe for example, you don't want people in office A to have access, people in accounting to have access to people in HR. So you can, within an organization, you can create. So this is here where we're selecting remote access, remote inbound ports to be 3389. Just leave it at that. You can go on. Or we can choose HTTPS. Okay, let's just use 3389.
Let's go back.
No, we can continue with 3389 for the inbound ports. So now here, okay, here we're now talking about the operating system. Sorry, scroll up a bit. Notice this word here, operating system disk and a temporary disk for short-term storage. So Azure has an operating system disk, which is used for short-term storage. So like, remember I mentioned earlier about the disk storage, where we have the blob storage, we have the other under storage I talked about, under, if you remember, the Azure core services. So here we're talking about the virtual machine disk encryption, disk storage. And if you scroll down, let's just use the default ones that are already existing. We won't change anything here. Let's just use this image default is 1 to 7 gig. Let's use these ones that are existing. Premium SSD, local redundant storage, yes, it's fine. What else? Key management, yeah. So the only thing you need to change really here most times is usually the OS disk type. The OS disk type. You can see it highlighted by with the red icon there. Sometimes I like to use the standard SSD, best for web servers. You see the functions are listed there. Very easy. The functions are listed there so you can know. So for example, now we are creating just a simple SharePoint application. We're hosting, imagine we're hosting a normal SharePoint application on maybe a hotel reservation service with our SharePoint, and we're hosting it on this virtual machine. Now we would, the disk type, we have the premium SSD, we have the standard SSD, we have the standard HDD. And you see that there's an option for backup. So depending on what your VM is going to be. So if we were creating this virtual machine to become a backup, we would focus on using it as a standard HDD. But right now we're creating it as for something that's just lightly used enterprise application, which is standard SSD. So you can change the disk type to standard SSD. So do you want us to leave it at premium SSD?
I've already changed it.
Okay.
I think it's lagging from you. Can you see it now?
Yes. Okay. So next.
Can you see it?
Yes. Okay. So now this is the virtual network. So the virtual network is key because some people, I remember somewhere I saw somebody ask a question that what's the difference between a virtual network and a virtual machine, and I said, well, the difference is that usually you create a virtual network within a virtual machine. Create a virtual network between a virtual machine. So you create a VM, you create a virtual network to use, or you can create a virtual network to use an existing virtual machine. So, okay, virtual network, yes, cohorts. So it has addressed as cohort 6 VNets. Then the subnet is usually we're using the default subnet. But you can change it. You can change the subnet based on what you are. I want to believe that most people in this class have some networking background.
Your voice is low again.
I hope most people in this class, I said, I hope most people in this class can have some network background. And you know that when you're creating a virtual network, you need a public IP, you need a subnet. And so this is what, so the subnet here, we leave it at the default with the public IP. So note that this is VNet, right? Is the isolated section where you launch your Azure resources. So this is also, that's something you should note. In Azure, we don't have what they call the private and public subnets as you normally have in networking. So, but you have the public IP and you have subnets. So then you have the network security group. This is usually a virtual firewall at the subnet level. It's a virtual firewall at the subnet level. That's what the network security groups does for you. That's below. Okay, yeah. So now we are saying that the network security group we're choosing is basic, which serves like a virtual firewall. Then scroll down to the express route. Please scroll down. Basic, okay. The express route. Please scroll down. Basic, okay. So
That's the last.
okay, yeah. So notice this here. We have load balancing options. Load balancing options. If you remember earlier, I spoke about the load balancing. So the load balancing is important because this determines a whole lot. You don't want to build a virtual machine that is slow and people cannot access resources on that virtual machine because you've not been able to apply proper load balancing. So what the load balancing would do is to enable your traffic to know where to flow, know where to go, know where your traffic is going, know where it's coming in, knowing how to apply protocols. So like it said, it supports TCP and UDP network traffic. So the load balancing is where the port forwarding and outbound flows, where you can say, okay, emails go to this side. So you can have a virtual machine that does multiple functions. And at the same time, you can say this virtual machine, it also loads traffic. So what happens is, why do you think that when you have 3 virtual machines, maybe you have one as the main, you can have 2 as backup? So what the load balancer does is that it routes the data and the information of your traffic round, but it gives one to become like the sole distributor. It makes one primary. It knows how to arrange the traffic, so you are not having congestion. So the backup virtual machines do not serve as a threat to the ones that are existing. Or you don't have problem because something that you are creating something as a backup, sometimes if you do not set it properly, you have information entering each other and you now start having conflicts on the virtual machine, which can result in you not being, the virtual machine not being available for access. So the virtual load balancer helps you to redistribute, and that's why, like it's written here, supports network traffic. So if you need something that would help your traffic, that's what the Azure load balancer will do. Let's choose the Azure load balancer, even though we're not okay. Let's just choose it. So we have the application gateway. This is a site-to-site VPN connection between your virtual network and your local networks. So depending on what you are trying to set up. So if I want to set up a virtual private network with my office application, and maybe somewhere in Lagos versus somewhere in London, I can use this virtual network gateway, the application gateway. It will set what it says web traffic load balancer for the web. So sometimes some people create firewalls using this application gateway, and then they will now set it up in a way that, okay, traffic that is passing through, traffic for videos, let it pass through here. Traffic for music, let it pass through this. And one of the things about it is that it is like for when you're talking about different locations. So maybe my Lagos office, I want Lagos office to handle a certain part of our SharePoint site. And I want maybe Uyo office to handle security of the SharePoint site. So I can create a VPN connection between them such that it will now connect with the local networks using the application gateway. So in this case, we are using our Azure load balancer, because what we are dealing with is not something to do with locations. That we're not dealing with a site-to-site location. We are dealing with like an in-house application for the virtual machine right now. So this is why we would use the Azure load balancer. The next. So this management, we leave it, and we're not applying anything now. Just the, okay, this other ones will be taught in the other class. The system roles, management roles. That's like the access control levels. Then monitoring. This will enable storage accounts. So you notice that we clicked on the boot diagnostics. The other one will enable a custom storage account. That's like a new custom storage account. Or this other one will enable managed storage account, which is ideal. I always advise better to use the enabled storage account. Next, we want us to enable. Okay, so we can name the tag, we can add value, and we can change the resource. But in this case, should we leave it as default? Okay.
So okay, what's next, please?
Review and create.
Review and create.
Validation failed for the networking. What did we fail to do? For subnets, public IP. Okay, create new. Public, yes. Public IP.
Okay. Oh.
Okay. Yes. So you can see the subscription credits apply, which will be 0.0160 USD per hour. This is what we'll be paying per hour. So our
Review of everything.
Anybody in the world can see it right now. Once we create the virtual machine, so we review. You see our disks, networking. So remember I mentioned the four services of Azure. You see networking, disks, storage. Disks falls under storage. Then we have the compute.
Okay.
And then we have.
Can I create now?
Yes, yes. Create.
Yeah.
Okay.
Creating.
So it's submitting. So this may take a while. So now we have created our virtual machine. And it says deployment is in progress. So it's taking some minutes. Notice that the cohort NSG network gateway is there. Notice the VNet dash VNet is there. They notice that's the network. They notice the IP is there. These are some of the resources that is required for your virtual machine to work effectively. You need the network, the VNet. You need the NSG. You need the IP. You also need a server for this, for the virtual machine to work. Sometimes you don't need this. Sometimes you can create a virtual machine without it. Okay, so this is how to create your virtual machine. I hope you have been following. Notice that this notice the if you create a Microsoft, this is a Windows Server 2022 virtual machine that is hosted on this virtual machine. Windows Server 2022 is hosted on this virtual machine, and therefore you see the option here. You can create another virtual machine with another server hosted on it to maybe become the backup for this initial virtual machine. Virtual machine agent is not ready to publish. Okay. So look at the parameters that have been set here. So this is our public IP address for this cohort 6. For this cohort 6 virtual machine that has been created. Notice that our domain name has not been configured. No, I hope you remember that the DNS name is usually the name that resolves your IP address. That's the converter that converts your IP address. The service responsible for translating your service name to an IP address, to its IP address. But we didn't configure it, so it can work without the DNS name for now. So you notice the subscription ID. Notice that this location, West Europe Zone 1, as we mentioned earlier about location, these are some of the things that eat your money or eat your subscription. The zoning, the location. So one thing I want to highlight here is that in Azure, you don't have public and private subnets in Azure. In Azure, you don't have public and private subnets. The only thing is that you just ensure that you create one subnet that will reach your routing table through the internet gateway. That will get to the internet gateway. So you don't need public subnets, you don't need private subnets. You just need a subnet that can reach the routing table to get to the internet gateway, which we have here. So that's why you don't see the subnet. Okay. So another thing again I want to just highlight is that the Azure DNS is a hosting service for DNS domains. So for people that may say, oh, I have a domain name, I want to host it on Azure. That's what the Azure DNS does for you. It's a hosting service for DNS domains. So one thing you should know is that under it, you have what they call the public domain names, the private domain names. One faces the internet, one is internal. The private is internal, and then the public is internet. It faces the internet. So when we talk about the internal means that it is for your local use, maybe your local office within Nigeria, from Lagos to Sokoto to Bayelsa. But the internet, when we talk about the public DNS, means that it is facing the internet. So right now, you see our public IP address, 135.236.106.36. It's facing the internet. So I will just quickly highlight this again. So imagine, I wish I could draw this, but no problem. Maybe another time I'll have to draw it and show you the user base. So there's the user base where this is like the user using his laptop. Imagine that, and then it goes to where they call the load balancer. The load balancer shares the traffic. Okay, this is for this is for that. Then it takes it down to the database. The database stores the information, keeps this data. Oh, this person has logged in at SharePoint. She has made a reservation in this hotel, for example. Then the file systems. So it goes from the load balancer to the servers, from the servers to the database and to the file system. The file system is where you can have your network files that apart from the network files, you can have other files that, as I mentioned earlier. Your database, we have SQL database, we have the pre-novel SQL database, different types of database based on the kind of function that you are working with. That's how you choose your database. So some
meet people.
Yes, it can. Number one, she said, doesn't mean that what you just created can be seen like an app on the system. Yes, depending on virtual machine. Yes, there's also what they call the virtual app service. Can it have a link so that one can save it as a portfolio that a potential employer can view? Yes, but they'll have to have access to your account. However, there's a link you can share. Because we just created as a virtual machine to host.
Okay.
What kind?
So if I can add to that, or yes, if I can add to that, I believe the person asking question might be maybe I think Esther might be a data person or a software developer. There are people that create or designer. There are people that create portfolios, to share with clients. Now, when it comes to virtual machine, right? Virtual machine is just like your computer, but the difference here is it is abstract. It's not something you can see, but you can feel it and you know that it's there. Unlike your physical computer that you can see, feel, touch, right, and hold in your hand, right? So now she talked about DNS earlier. The beauty of Azure is the fact that when you create it, there is option for the public IP. That public IP allow you to be able to connect to that virtual machine from anywhere that you are, anywhere you are. Okay. Now, the download that you saw here earlier, I think that should be at the point of creation. That download means something. What it means is you should download the configuration, the settings that you just used to create this virtual machine now. After creation on that particular page, it was asking if you want to download that setting as and now use it as a template. So you can now upload that template later and configure it and use it to create further virtual machine in the future that will have the same exact configuration as this one without you going through the step by step that we went through. That was the download that you saw there earlier. The second option where you can see download also is in the case where you want to connect to the virtual machine. To connect to the virtual machine now, you have two options. Yes, two options. One is to use remote desktop. If I say connect right now, it's going to give me different options to connect. If I click connect, you notice it has brought me, it took me away from the overview page and brought me to the connect section of that virtual machine. This is more like me finding a way to connect to my laptop that is in my hand. So I'm looking for a way also to connect to this virtual machine that has been created in the cloud. Now to connect to it also, just like you saw the option to download something earlier, download the setting as a template and reuse. Yes, for future reuse or for automation is why you want to download the first download that you saw as a template. But this second one is for you to be able to connect now to your virtual machine and start installing your application. So I said to connect to it, you have two options. One is to use the native RDP. If you notice while we were creating the virtual machine, there was a section that say connect and select firewall ports, right? Specify the firewall port for inbound connection. And it says everybody on the internet or all devices on the internet will be able to connect to your virtual machine. There are two things that is responsible for that. One is the public IP address that makes the virtual machine to be reachable anywhere, anywhere in the world. That's from anywhere in the world, as long as you have your internet connection. And two is the port number that we have allowed, because by default, every virtual machine you create have a mini firewall in it. Mini firewall. So yet, Tosin talked about it. Where he talked about NSG. That's under the network when we're configuring the network, and even after configuring, she was telling us why the virtual machine was in the process of creation. You saw something like public IP, you saw VNet, you saw NSG. That NSG is the firewall that is allowing or denying or permitting or blocking access from the internet to this virtual machine. So if we do not enable a port, or if you do not enable a service, every service that is running have a protocol that is using, and that protocol have a port number that it uses. So the port number that allow us to remotely connect to our virtual machine and manage it through remote desktop protocol is port 3389. So if I want to go now with this native connection option, I can also download RDP file here. Now this RDP file is just a mini app that you that contain the IP address of the server and possibly the username that you use to connect to it. So let's say you set up a resource on this server now, and you want to share that resource. You want your employer or potential employer to view it and see what you have done with that solution on that server. You can download this mini remote desktop application app. If I click download now, it's going to download it, and then I will just say keep, right? I can go to my download, the location it downloaded to, and this is the file. So this file right now contains the IP address of the server, how I'll be able to reach it. You can copy this file and share it with your potential employer, and they will be able to just double click it. Once they double click it, it's going to open something like this for them and ask them, you see, if you notice, take note of this IP, right? The IP is 135.236. If I'm seeing very well, my screen is far away from me. .108 or so, .3 something, right? If we go to the screen, to the page also, you see the same IP here, 135.236.106.36. This IP is public IP, and it can be reached, can be called from anywhere, right? That's one way to give that file to your employer, and once they click it, where is it again? Oh, just hold on. Right. Once they click it and say connect, it's going to connect. And like Tosin said, for them to now connect, they need a credential. Credential here is username and password. Recall we created a username while we were creating the virtual machine. And the username we created was cohort 6. But I created the password, right? And the password, you too, you can actually try it. For you to try it, you can just go to your computer and launch. I go to start. Start is not coming up on the other screen. If I go to start on the computer, if you type remote desktop or you type RDP, you type RDP, it will bring an app called remote desktop connection. Click that app and type your IP address, this IP address. Type it there and try to connect. Now, the password I use is a test machine, so we can as well release the password. The password that I use is this. The title of our training today is, I will get the title, but this first topic is managing, administering virtual machine, right? This is the password I use, and I'm putting it in the chat box. If anybody wants to try to connect to it, you can connect to the VM. The only caveat to connecting to the VM is the fact that only 2 people can connect to it at a time. But there must be different accounts for the 2 people that have to connect to it, right? 4 of you cannot use the same account, the same username at the same time. So the IP was 135.236.106 and .36. I've posted it on the chat if you want to try it. But while I'm trying, once I connect, if you try to connect, it's going to throw the first person, it's going to throw the person out. So that's the way it works. For you to have multiple people connecting at the same time, you need a license that Microsoft said, which is called RDP license, right? But to give it to your potential employer, that's what you will do. Download that app or copy the IP address, share with them, and they will try to connect. Then you will have to give them a credential, that's username and password to you. So I will just, it's the same thing I type for you on the chat. I just click OK. And as I click OK, you do like this, connect, and give me all this information here. And I'll click yes. connect, right? And you do this again, and it will try to connect. Once it's connected, we are currently inside the virtual machine that we created, and we can start doing whatever we want to do on this particular virtual machine. That is one way to connect to your virtual machine. Recall, I said if you want to give it to an employer, you can download that app, this app, RDP app, and share with them. Then with your credential, yes, somebody have thrown me out. So then with your credential, you give it to them. That's one way. Another option is you just give them this IP address and the credential also. They will launch the RDP app, remote desktop app. Let me open that and bring it up for you. I will just go to start, type RDP, and it's going to bring this app for you called remote desktop connection. Then you copy this IP or type this IP, type it in here, and you hit connect, and it will go through the same process as when I use the downloaded app to connect. That's it. That's using IP or RDP to connect. The second option to connect to it is using the backend, right? If I use this is what requires that storage that I was talking about. For this to work, I will need to create a storage account that the Bastion service will store on. What this allow me, this service, what they allow us to do is to connect using the browser as we are connecting to Azure portal on the browser right now. We use browser at the same time to connect to the virtual machine. But there is cost implication to this. The first one is free. Anybody can connect to it without issue. But this second service, using Bastion, you pay for the Bastion service and you're also using storage, which is another cost, but it's secure, it's more secure because it uses the latest HTML version. And this is what Microsoft is also recommending for customers now to start using because they are phasing out RDP, right, from either both Windows. But if you don't want to use this option, there's also a new app that they've released, which your operating system must support that new remote connection app. You have to go to the store, install the app. Let me see if I have it installed. Windows. There's what they call RDP. Okay, I don't have it installed yet, but that's another one. But it's also using remote desktop connection to connect. But this one, the Bastion, you've noticed is asking you already. It's asking for us to create a Bastion resource, and it's going to store it in this same resource group. Then it's going to use this same VNet, the virtual network that has been created before. But this is a name actually for the Bastion service. But it will use the same virtual network that was created earlier, if you recall. Then it will have its own public IP. And the skill is speaking is standard. You have, I think you have standard. I can't remember. I think they've removed basic. There used to be basic standard, but they've removed basic. So it's standard. Then there's another plan rather. But this is at a cost. It's not free. Fasting is not free. So you have to also consider what you are doing, right? So that answer the question of can you download and can you share a link with a potential employer, right? And the third one say, what kind of use case or portfolio project can we create? So because it's Azure and what we are doing here right now have to do with IaaS, right? It has to do with infrastructure. So if you want to tell a customer or an employer that yes, you have worked with Azure, you created virtual machine, your virtual machine, you deploy this, that. This is also a way to although I'm not sure if I really understand the portfolio that you are talking about, but use case, if you recall Tosin's talk around use case earlier, to talk about the fact that you might want to host an application and or you are deploying, your developers are building an application and you want to test it first using virtual machine before you deploy it to production. You have different ways or different options of hosting your application. You can either host it as under the PaaS, which is using app service and SQL database, or you use it you host it under the infrastructure as a service, which means you have to install that application on a virtual machine. Like the virtual machine we have created, we can choose to come and deploy that application on this virtual machine. Okay, so you can use it for web services, you can use it for application services, you can use it to host production application or resources, and you can use it to host test resources. Before you deploy to production, you want people to test it first. You can use that as a use case scenario. Another use case scenario is maybe you want to use it to store backup configuration. No, not backup configuration. You want to use it to back up the certain data, right? You can create a virtual machine to backup for backup purposes. You can create a virtual machine also, apart from application for other resources, anything you want to install, sir, app service, virtual machine can help you to use it. Now, the second way, the way you can also create a link. Remember what I showed you to give your employer right now is downloading the app or giving them the IP address to use. You can also create a link. How will you create a link? She talked about something on DNS here, and she explained, Tosin explained what DNS means. That it converts, it translates IP address to name. So for instance, instead of me trying to remember these four these digits or these numbers, it's not easy for me to remember it. But I can give this virtual machine a name. For instance, we call it cohort 6 VM. Maybe I want to give it that same cohort 6 VM. What I will do is I will go and configure network. I'll configure network and give it, once I say configure under the DNS, if I configure DNS, right, then it will ask me the name you want to use. I can give it a name that is very easy. We can give it the same cohort 6 VM. And now it's saying the domain name is invalid. Right, domain name is invalid. But okay, lowercase. I will give it the same name as the computer name. So it's easy. So I can copy this. If I want to give somebody this URL to connect to, so they can't just go to browser, they will still go to the remote desktop application to connect. So I will give them cohort 6 vm.west.europe.cloudapp.azure.com. But they can't go to a browser and just type it in and enter. They have to still use this application to access it. So I think I've been able to extensively, in collaboration with Tosin, to answer that question for you. Oh, okay. You say you get it. That's fine. Then he said, Microsoft, and will I see all this and create mine on Microsoft Learn? Yes, we will look for a sandbox for you that will allow you to be able to create. The only problem we have with the sandbox is the fact I think it expires within an hour, but you can relaunch it. If you launch it the first time, you will see it will tell you. Someone speaking. Okay. So let me see. Let me bring that our slide open again. You notice here, right? The slide, the week 1 information that I shared. There are 3 lab exercises there. The very first one is for you to learn how to enable sandbox. That was the very first one. And the next 2 is for you to launch a sandbox that allow you to explore, play around this interface, play around the portal, right? I'll go back home. No, I'm not saving. I just discard it. Yes, it's to play around this Azure portal. If I open it this way, you might see your own this way, right? It's to play around this portal. That's one of it that I gave to you, that we share with you guys last week. And the second one was to work with resources. Now, when you want to create resources, where do you go and how do you go about it? That was the second option. But this week, we are going to share with you on how you are going to create a virtual machine. So you will launch, where's my browser again? The link will give you, one of it will lead you straight to this exercise. Then you will click and you launch. But make sure you are logged in with your Microsoft Learn profile account. It doesn't really necessary. Just log in with an Outlook account. And once you click, it will automatically sign you in and give you access to a subscription for you to walk around and do and complete the task. And below, when you scroll below, you will see all the tasks that you are required to complete on that particular sandbox. But anyone that is not detailed enough, we will attach extra lab guide for especially those that have access to subscription that they can actually get. And I will encourage us, really, it's for our own learning, right? I think we can stop the recording here. I will encourage us because it's for our own learning. Oh, someone say virtual machine is not a, sorry, compute. Okay, Tosin is answering someone, right? Then, okay, virtual machine is not a server. Okay. All right, so